Welcome, everyone. This is Meg Benke. I'm provost at Empire State College, part of the State University of New York. I'm also a former commissioner of Middle States. And on behalf of Middle States, I welcome you to this seminar on assessing quality in online administration and student services, with also a shout out to all of us making the even more launch during the COVID time period. I need to do a little bit of housekeeping details right at the beginning. So Josh, if you would, right at the beginning, we need to let you know that this seminar will be recorded, and we also have interpreters available. And this will be posted, a copy of this will be posted on YouTube. We also, as you can see on this slide, we're not giving professional advice that you would normally get from your commission staff person. We are giving you collegial advice from the field as experts in the assessment of online learning. So welcome. Thank you. If you have a question during the, if everybody could mute, we have somebody who's not muted, so if people could mute, that would be great. If you joined the petition, to submit a question, if you joined the session on your desktop, this is your participant panel. You will use the chat option and you will send questions. So there'll be someone listed as question and answers #1. You send that your questions to me as question #1, and then there'll be another host that'll be question #2. You will send your questions there. No matter what, we'll all jump in and help. As you may not know, this seminar started out with a registration of 200 people. We actually got 700 registrations. So this is clearly a topic that people are interested in, and I'm sure Middle States will probably repeat some related topics, we hope, in this area. Go to the next slide. If you joined on your mobile device, the participant check-in is at a slightly different spot. Josh, we may need to go back there. I think we jumped. So there's a chat feature there on your mobile, and then there's a participant panel. That's where you would use to submit moving forward. And I'll move forward now with introductions to my colleagues. This is how you follow us on Middle States. And next I will introduce our colleagues. I'm pleased to lead this seminar. As I mentioned, I'm a Middle States former commissioner, also a former dean of online learning, and in the online learning world for more than I care to admit as far as my age. I'm also very pleased to invite my two colleagues who I invited to join with us on this panel. They are the two co-authors of the Online Learning Consortium Scorecard for learner support services, and have become very strong experts on developing this instrument, and also on assessing it at their own institution, other institutions in Florida, and also beyond. It's Dr. Victoria Brown, who is associate professor and former assistant provost for the Center for eLearning at Florida Atlantic University, and Josh Strigle, who is the director of eLearning and learning support services at the College of Central Florida. They'll tell you a little bit more in the discussion about how this particular instrument was developed, but we'll move forward. So a little bit of what we want to talk about. The framework for this workshop was really about how we as leaderships in institutions focus on continuous improvement and assessment, during traditional times, how we were working when we were, slowly and carefully developing online learning programs, over the, the last, 15 to 20 years in many institutions. But then we also had this accelerated event during this past year where many institutions had to do a quick turnaround. And when I looked at the list of the registrants for this session, it appears that many of you are people like that who have had to do pretty quick turnaround and have done, what we hope will actually be, some of it was emergencies, but some of it was probably very, brought out some innovation at your institutions. So now what I think we hear from our colleagues in the fields that many institutions pivoted quickly in the spring, and now we're going back and we're trying to make sure that we're doing the administration and the student support services in a quality way. Move forward. Just throw out a question to people, and we know this is going to be tough with 500 people or whatever we end up on this session, but we wanted you to ask, to just tell us a little bit about what areas of online student support that you consider a challenge to measure. What do you see as the area that that you really think you're worried about? Send us just a quick comment to Q&A 2 that's lined up there. And while my colleague Victoria is going to be collecting those comments, and while you're pondering a little bit about what areas you're worried about, I might just say that there are a number of areas that we have seen in our history for the need for improved student support. One was just the sheer growth in the enrollment in online. And then second was the organic growth of these services as time went on. And then thirdly, that there might be unequal distribution of availability across different students within your organization, between the face-to-face students, between the online students, and what was available at the institution. So I'm just asking Vicki if she might tell me a number of the areas that people are worried about at their institution.
There is a variety of concerns about what's going on right now. Some of it is, are the students participating? Are we able to retain? Do they have the technology they need? How do you define engagement? How do we bring students into our engagement at our institution? How do we know if the students have good quality study spaces? So, and then of course there's advising and participation and those type of things.
It's so interesting that you're asking many of the questions that myself and my colleagues here in the SUNY system, but also that Vicki and Josh have been talking about. And one of the things that we're hoping to share with you is some methodologies for assessing the way you provide your services right now. And so knowing about their technology or knowing about their study space at home through doing, some surveys or other methodologies that can help you to figure out what is the current situation and how it could be improved moving forward. So we greatly appreciate the areas that you identified, and we'll try through our examples in this presentation to give you some ideas of ways that we've done this at our own institutions or institutions that we know. We'll move forward, Josh. So, one of the things that, we always, two of us on this call are professors, so we have to, give the give the background of, why we think that it's important for having student support services. I think all of you on this call would recognize that, students who are studying online deserve comparable services to what our campus participants have. And, you know, that doesn't always mean exactly the same, but we need to look at, you know, how we have developed our our services. And this has changed over time. You know, there were earlier studies that showed that students who were working online were not achieving the same goals. And that we, you know, really needed to work on the factors toward success. The Western Cooperative for Educational Technology, way back in 2001, developed a very strong student services development model for online students. And then we've continued in the field to have the needs identified by distance learning leaders across the country and through national conferences that are available through, you know, multiple professional organizations. But we need to tie student success to the services, no matter what the delivery methods that we have. And that these services do help to register for online student support. We'll move forward. So I wanted to give you just a couple of examples, and this is a very busy slide. But I wanted to share some examples from SUNY, where I work, where we have 40 of 64 campuses that have utilized the administrative scorecard from the Online Learning Consortium. And for those of you who come from systems offices like SUNY, although there aren't that many like SUNY with 64 campuses, just a couple, but many of you have private consortiums of colleges, you have networks of colleges in the state. You'll hear more from Vicki and Josh about work that they did in Florida between multiple institutions. But there's value in doing some sort of scorecard or assessment in methodology, particularly when you are working with like-minded institutions. And we found in SUNY that this methodology for assessing your services on the administrative side can both be helpful for mature campuses and novice campuses. You know, you get to be able to learn from the best practices of the mature campuses, but also to, you know, lay your groundwork up against and engage the leadership of the institution in ways to improve the online services. What we also did in SUNY was the SUNY Online Central staff developed a database of best practices that are available across the system so that we can learn from ways that we did continuous improvement. And then what we also did was develop a set of facilitators who could go and serve as best practice consultants at each other's campuses to build our capacity. You know, so for example, in COVID in New York, we found that some of our campuses who are brand new to online learning have actually been really astute at getting student engagement through clubs, organizations, and other social programming. So these folks at the relatively new campuses are actually really leading the initiative in, you know, one or two areas. So this network really helps to work with improvements. We've also been able to engage various levels of positions with those involved in online learning. For example, you know, we've gotten to be able to get together with the CFOs, the CIOs, you know, the academic officers, the library directors, the IR directors, because if you're doing assessment in a certain area and you see that, you know, there needs to be library improvement or, you know, one particular area, then you can work across institutions. And then we developed something in SUNY that was called a SUNY Online Signature Status, where you, if you work, you know, to improve your services to a particular area, you also have access to, you know, some financial or technology occasional offerings that are new at the system level, which allows us to work together. And then at the system level, they like the fact that they can judge where we have strengths and weaknesses and how we can continue to work together to improve or to offer professional development across the system. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to mention one other scorecard that's also available. This is just a rubric that was developed. It's called Oscar, that was developed at SUNY, is now offered at the Online Learning Consortium. This is a scorecard that works more on the instructional design side with the instructors and the others who work on this. We also know that there, are many other assessment methodologies that people can use. My colleagues now are going to talk a little bit more about the learner support model that has been used in assessment and how they have used this to move forward. So the next slide.
I was going to try to talk while I was muted. Sorry about that. So there are several models that I kind of want to preface before I launch into this and follow up a little bit on what Meg has to say. There are many different models that can be used for assessing different elements within distance learning. And if you are wanting to know more information about that, please share that with Josh or I or Meg, and we will get some other kinds of scorecards that are available out there, different rubrics that you can use to evaluate the effectiveness of an online program, or even how to manage your instructional design side of the house or program development side of the house. But for what we found, and you'll find this actually regardless of different institutions, is that the models for online student support services vary because of maybe the way they were developed or put together. So for example, you could have started off with a vision that you wanted to have an online program, so you might have stood up as a separate college or a separate part of your institution that was delivering just the online. And inside of that unit would have been some online services. Other institutions, their online programs are developing more from the ground up at the program level, where departments are deciding what courses they're going to be putting online. And then those programs might have sought different groups or support services to help with those students in their online environment. So it wasn't necessarily a comprehensive look at the types of services that were needed, but more of a programmatic look at it. What is important for us to understand right now is that regardless of whether you were standalone or if you were doing face-to-face, all of a sudden, all of us needed to move online. And so the services are now going to be ubiquitous. In other words, they're embedded within the institution, and each of the different offices are now supporting that mission to support the online students. But it's kind of, with that is the question of what do we need to do and how can we improve, and are we helping our students? So Josh, can we move forward, please? So before we get really started with our conversation here, we would like to know how would your institution measure quality and the availability of online services? So kind of take a step back here and let's just kind of reflect on what we are actually doing. And is there any kind of flaws in that system or something that you think you could do better within that system? And please share any questions or that you have with Meg. And she will be our Q&A one. I'm not so sure what's happened, Josh.
Yeah, I think I lost my screen share. Bear with me for just a moment. While everyone's pondering the question, my PowerPoint crashed, so I just need to reopen that.
That's fine.
Josh is always good at juggling 3 different machines. He's got backups on his backups, so we're good. So there's a couple people, Vicki, that are saying that they're not to this point yet. That they are using some student satisfaction surveys, so they're thinking they might measure in the same way that they do face-to-face services. So I'm assuming that's something like some of the national surveys of student satisfaction. Some are also thinking that there are some limits because we're working with traditional students now, rather than students that chose online services from the first. So being careful about how that there's, an even experience for people who didn't necessarily choose this. I think that we're also seeing some that are using some other data analytics, retention rates, participation rates in the online, online space, and then the LMS. I think people were saying that they have a little bit more time for this in the fall. Also looking at faculty course evaluation. That's always one we need to be a little careful with on using those surveys. But if there are, ones that aren't about faculty evaluation, but are actual truly course evaluation. I think a couple of concerns coming in that during the pandemic, there was, uneven participation. And some concerns, it sounds like people are struggling a little bit with this. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I do hear frequently that students are struggling with participation and keeping up the participation rates and the success and retention rates that you might have had before COVID with your face-to-face or even in your distance learning. And I would say that's a concern across the board as we put students online who were not trained to know what to do as they walked into these online courses, and faculty members who were struggling with moving on their courses online who may or may not have had all the support they needed in order to do that. So I think in the distance learning field, one of our concerns is that this COVID experience is going to give maybe a bad rep to distance ed, that we've worked so hard to cultivate this high quality distance learning approach when all of a sudden, people who are not so prepared were doing it.
Right.
And I think that monitoring the retention rates and seeing which students are not successful and were successful, I think is going to be helpful. But I also think some of the things we talk about within our scorecard will help with identifying what you can do to increase the retention and participation rate of the students.
Yeah. If I can jump in, one of the things that we discussed at great length amongst my peers in Florida is, with this change moving online, was it appropriate to use the same nomenclature for the courses even and truly call them online courses? Or should we kind of develop another modality so that when it came time to measure, we could continue to measure our courses, which have been through our standard development processes and the services were already built around. And then we could also measure the courses that were put online in this emergency fashion and then see how we did with those. And I think most institutions opted for maintaining some way systematically to measure those two different types of courses separately.
Thank you. Absolutely. You were going to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other people in the comments that are saying the same thing, Josh, you're saying, is that, categorizing remote learning experiences that might involve some sort of more of a flipped classroom kind of lecture format that's different than traditional learning, that some institutions have developed two different definitions and are trying to assess quality in both of those delivery methodologies. I am also hearing that a couple campuses have created kind of an online working group, particularly the institutions that are new, so that the support services and administrative offices are working horizontally in the institutions to understand what are the common problems that students are coming up with. And then I guess the other theme that's here is that students were extremely accommodating in the spring and summer, but now expectations are higher, and that they're looking for a higher expectation of quality. And, you know, particular populations like first generation students who might not have nice space in their home where they can have a video on, you know, that you have to make accommodations for, you know, how you can help students to be successful.
One of the things I think has been helpful with the COVID is that faculty and student support services are getting to a window into the students' lives. And I think that's valuable because I don't think sometimes in our bubble, we have the technology, so we almost assume everyone else does. We have the space, so we assume everyone else does. And I know I talk a lot with faculty about, do you really need to have that webcam on? Mainly because it may be very embarrassing for that student to have that webcam on and to give that window into their life to their professor that you would not normally have. But at the same time, I think it's also helping us to be more sympathetic about what our students are going through and understanding things from their point of view, because we do have that window. So it's been very kind of a two-way street, and us understanding the students and also maybe helping us by removing some of the barriers that were in place that we didn't realize were in place for our students to access our courses, to register, to do the simple things that they were having to go on campus for may have not been necessary. And now, you know, I think as we emerge from this, our processes are going to be so much easier for the students as we have eliminated some of the roadblocks.
And just one final comment, our colleagues from the CUNY, from the system, CUNY system area, City University of New York, mentioned the useful of having online readiness modules for students. And I know that many institutions have developed these over time, but particularly in these times of COVID, to have those online readiness modules available, and then to also, when, you know, the results of that online readiness are not, you know, that the person might have some areas or some gaps, that you have some resources that people can use. And I know at SUNY, and I know at Vicki and Josh's institutions, we look carefully at, you know, when students don't have the right resources, how do we figure out how to get them connected and networked to areas that they can improve in through online modules, through technology support, or other areas.
Yes, and the technology, I noticed I'm coming through on my private chat was, you know, wow, the surprise at how many students did not have internet connections in their home, and what did that look like? So let's go on to our next slide. It is a valuable conversation. We appreciate hearing things that you are concerned about. So there are different types of things that you can use to assess whether you're how your services are doing. One of them is simply, you know, student satisfaction. Are they happy with what you're doing? Are they not happy, or do they not have access? There's also some learning analytic tools out and available that you can use to identify very quickly if students are not engaging. And I think on my part, I find some of those disappointing. I think Blackboard is way ahead on using these learner analytics and can give you notice of who's participating in an online class and who's not very early. There's some really good research out there about how if you can get 3 engagement points in the first week of class, that you could measure whether students are engaging in those 3 points. And if they are not, you can begin immediately before grades are being submitted, interacting and pulling those students into online. And so if you have those analytic tools in place, you can certainly use them. I know we struggle with our learning management system in that it gives us that information a day late. So by the time we receive it, it's not instantaneous, but sometimes by the time we get it to our support personnel, that the situation's already resolved. But as much as possible, looking at those learning analytics, we also have advising tools that professors can send messages to our advisors immediately to say, look, the student's not engaging with me. Is it possible for you to reach out? So, so we can start getting the outreach going out to those students and finding out what the issues are way ahead of time. And it's interesting, in spite of everything we've done, I received an email message today from a student who said they were struggling financially, which was why they were not turning in assignments. And thankfully, because I've been involved in student services, I knew that there was care money available, and I was able to immediately connect that student to care funding. So it's just making sure all of those systems are working together. There's also an organizational analysis, and I think that's important, and I'm so glad that our institution went through an organizational analysis before COVID, and then I want to really make it very clear that our institution was in a very different place than I know many of you were, because we were actually practicing these, putting in place online practicing strategies for online services way before the COVID hit. So we were able to really quickly transition into that mode of delivery and support our students. So going through the organizational analysis that Josh and I will be talking about, I think will be very helpful. Peer review and benchmarking is another option that you can use. And actually, Josh and I are working towards this. We just released our scorecard for an evaluation for a badge before COVID came through, and we are beginning to be able to benchmark with other institutions. So it's been disrupted. That process has been disrupted, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to that point after things return to normal. So there's also the ability to certify your services. So there's, in distance education, there's many programs. Online Learning Consortium has some certification services. Quality Matters are the big ones, but there are a few others. And just to remember that all of these things should be pulled together and used in the accreditation process. And I can say that at our institution, if you're from the southern states, it's a really big deal to make sure that you have not only the academic and instructional pieces in place, but that you also have the student services in place. So it was embedded into many of our criterion that we had to respond to. And going through the organizational analysis really helped us do a better job of answering those. We were one of the first institutions that had analysis for our distance learning program, and we came through with flying colors. So tools for evaluating services. There's the certification for online student support that's available from Quality Matters. And I've given you a URL here. And then there's Net and Quality Matters embeds the student support inside other scorecards. And so does LOC if you're doing the administration support card. It's embedded in there. But Because of the lack of support services that were being put in place for online students, the online student support scorecard was developed to specifically target online student support. So where would you like your institution to be in offering online student support? If you were to imagine a perfect world where you had everything you needed, what would that look like?
All right. While you're thinking about that question and submitting those comments, I'll just give you a little bit of a background of the case studies and the research that Dr. Brown and I did in Florida that we'll be talking about. We'll each be talking about one of those in a minute, but we'll be talking about our own institutions, but this was done pretty much throughout Florida. We have two systems, Florida College system, which is there's a couple of traditional community colleges. Most of us are 2+2 institutions now, and then the state university system. So the scorecard was implemented a little bit differently between the two systems, and then a little bit differently within the systems, institution to institution. And I'll get into more specifics about the scorecard, but I'll pause here for some discussion of your responses to the question.
Well, it's fascinating, Josh. We have in our group here, we have some actually long experienced people in distance education, and they've got some great suggestions for how they're hoping to move forward. But I think there's one theme that I would say is that we hope this time of struggle actually turns out to be a time of great creativity, that that getting the whole institution engaged, we're getting some offices that maybe were historically not engaged. So somebody's saying, that they're recognizing the needs, particularly in the counseling area, and that they'd like to see increased counseling services to be available. There's a couple of suggestions that they'd like to have. There's two different points of view. One point of view is a more integrated model of support services, and the other model is more of a, dedicated within each student service or administrative functional area, that they would like to have experts embedded in each of those offices, so that things would be, so one is more of a, I would call it a one-stop model, and one is thinking, more distributed, but ubiquitous across the institutions. People are looking for training and certification of the staff, that maybe during this time period where we're working remotely, there could be increased professional development and expectations of standards, where things would move forward. But one colleague said, we have seen so much more understanding of online student needs, and we have been pushing this for years. So things are actually looking more positive. Josh.
All right, thanks. Yeah, those two different models that were mentioned, with maybe having a professional in each area versus having everyone cross-trained. We have had in some of our student services areas times where maybe one person would handle the Skype appointments or what have you. And now with COVID, basically everything's virtual, and I'll talk about that some more when I get to my case study. So it will be interesting to see what we go back to when we're able to start doing more in-person service, how we'll model that. So this is our time to discuss the the tool that we're using a little bit and just a brief history on it. Dr. Brown and I both served, well, I still serve, and she did serve on our members council for distance learning and student services with the Florida Virtual Campus. That's our statewide cooperative organization for libraries, distance learning, student services. A lot of things in Florida flow through that organization. And through that, we had begun work on developing the scorecard. Then through the University System Board of Governors and a 2025 strategic plan that they put in place, Dr. Brown was given a very similar charge. So we dovetailed that together, and we're able to include a lot of people in the development of this tool. So we were looking for a balanced approach and really the full life cycle of the student. So from recruitment all the way through graduation, and the different points of contact that the institution would have with the students. We used, and really, Dr. Brown at this point was using a modified Delphi method with our group of experts who were developing the scorecard. So when we get to the next slide, you'll see we really weren't looking for some nice even number of categories and even number of indicators within each category. We were looking for what was really appropriate to be measured within each area. And then we used a simple 0 to 2 point scale. We were, from the beginning, did not want this to be a punitive instrument. We didn't want something that was on a scale of 0 to 100 where it resembled a grading scale, and we didn't want institutions to be afraid of honestly scoring themselves and afraid of a low score. When you're evaluating your own services, if you're afraid to give yourself a low score, then you're not identifying the areas that really need improvement. So that's why we just gave each area a 0. We're not doing this at all. A 1, we're doing it, but it's not the best it could be. And then a 2 for truly exemplary level of service for that area. So this is just a breakout of our focus areas, our categories on the instrument. So you will see how different areas have a lot more items or fewer items to be evaluated based on what we felt was really critical in those areas. The place that you can get the scorecard, I believe this is also on a slide at the end, and have we put that in the chat yet for them? But this is basically the Online Learning Consortium has acquired the instrument. It's available free for download. There are some other materials such as a guidebook that are not free, but the link is there on the screen. Generally, if you just do a Google search for OLC Online Support Scorecard or something similar, this is going to be one of the first couple of results in Google. That's how I always find it when I need to send it to somebody, is just pop that in there and it comes up very easily. So this is where you'll find it. We have done a lot of promotion of the tool nationally and gotten a lot of good response. So I believe I'm turning it over back to Dr. Brown now.
Yes. So one of the questions I keep continuing to get is, how does the student support scorecard support engagement? And the reason it's supporting engagement is because it develops an online experience for students similar to what you're developing for your on-campus students. And what we were seeing is that even though you might have had good maybe a good online application, maybe good outreach for enrolling students, and possibly even in registering for classes, that the students were not getting a holistic experience. And I can speak from a faculty point of view, is that if I was teaching in a face-to-face class, I would have all of these wonderful support services that would help me engage the student, not only in my class, but with the institution. And as an institution, you're wanting those students to engage with you. You want them to think this is the absolutely best, wonderful experience they ever had. Because once they graduate, you want them to be donating money back to your institution. So engagement not beyond the classroom is just as important as the engagement that they were receiving in the classroom with the teacher. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we think that engagement should be the instructor's sole responsibility to make sure that students engaged. But it really takes, just like it takes an army of student support people to help with the face-to-face students, they're also needed there for your online. And one of the other points I always like to make when I'm talking with my colleagues is that online students often are your weaker students, and that they are unable to attend in a traditional format. And usually that is because something has happened in their lives. They would most likely like to be there with you on campus. So these are already students who are experiencing stress. They're most likely working or caring for children, or even caring for an elderly adult in their family. So these are reasons they're not attending on campus. So they're going to need actually more support than our traditional students. So as we were building out in my institution, we did have some services for academic services for online tutoring that had actually received some awards. So we already had some really good experiences being put in place for students who needed support online, including having live sessions with our student supports, with students embedded into classes who were then tutoring other students in those classes. They could also set up live tutoring appointments with assigned tutors within our tutoring center. We had online webinars for our math students, and we also had writing services within our academics, writing, how to write online. Our enrollment and admission services, were finally kind of making the transition to, this is important, we need to be bringing students online, and we had an online application, but we didn't have ability to support all papers needed for admission online, and we did not have a smooth process for our online students. They were just clumped in with our other students who were more traditional, and so they were getting the housing appointments and those kind of messages and that typical traditional students receive. Our academic affairs was very definitely focused on traditional students. And when we walked into those offices and talked to those people who were servicing those students, we'd ask, what are you doing for your distance learning? And the response was, we don't have students who attend fully online. And we'd have to be very, we would be informing them of how important online services was for the university and how many students were actually taking classes 100% online. Our graduate services were also very focused on traditional students, and you had to come to campus to learn how to write your thesis. You had to come to campus to learn how to write your dissertation. Grant training was on campus. So all of those services were on campus and readily available for our traditional students, but not for our online students. And then again, in our research office was also very focused on the traditional student, not necessarily the online. So as we're about to discuss these things, what kind of challenges do you think an online university would have trying to improve student support services? is hopefully you're beginning to get an idea of how complex that is and how many different offices are involved. So at our institution, we have 3,300 students, or 33,000 students, and 6,000 of them attend only online each semester. So a total of 17,000 students are taking online classes. Our institution is not the traditional student. It started off as a commuter school. We are still a commuter school in some respects, even though we now have dormitories for students to stay in. So many of our students work in the hospitality industry in our area. And with those part-time jobs, they often struggle with trying to get to campus to take courses because they're trying to maintain their work and their lifestyle. Meg, do you have some observations?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing a little bit about is that because in a large institution things are so spread out that I dropped that. Hey Michelle, can you put on your? Yeah, thank you. The training of staff is a concern. Offices don't work together. Offices are big offices, so they're spread apart. So you need, how do you get the campus leadership to encourage the shift, you know, of moving to support the various offices?
I think I'd like to share with you before we start this process how lucky I was. Our provost, when he came on board, he and I came on board at the exact same time, and his vision was that we would be developing an online experience for the students, and he wanted it to be holistic. So even though maybe he didn't know as much about distance learning as he would have liked, he did have that vision. So I had immediate support from the provost office. We also had support from the state. As the state implemented the scorecard, each institution knew that they were going to be measured in some way, shape, or form in how they're providing online student support services, which this was brought to the awareness of our presidents. So our president and provost were both on board for improving distance learning services. This was so important for me because I was running the distance learning program. So that, in order to implement this, I had to cross over from the provost office into the president's office and work with many, many of the people in the president's office under student affairs, under research, under the graduate office, which is back in the provost office. So it was actually fairly complex in doing this. But what was good is when I was out advocating for online student support services, I could actually say, look, this is part of our mission, it's part of our goals, and that we really want this to occur. So we were...
I'm thinking, Vicki, there are a couple questions about getting leadership engaged in institutions where there's lack of engagement. And I would just say, you know, what I've seen is to link to the provost or to the president, it's linking it to some of the other challenges that are ongoing at the institution, like increasing enrollment, increasing retention, increasing engagement that others have mentioned overall.
Right, those are also good for talking about the quality of services, and we actually had that also in play at our institution. So it was really helpful to get them involved as we were moving forward on those different initiatives. I think it's when you're struggling, if you're not quite, you don't have the support that I had in going into this, I think it is very important to talk about the impact of what you're doing on the students and making sure that you're talk about that holistic experience that, students need to be able to, if they're going to be 100% online, they need to be able to do all the admission process, all the registration processes, all the processes for dropping and adding classes. All of those things need to be online. There should be no reason why that student should have to come to campus. And as we built out our scorecard, that was our goal. Are you making them come to campus for some things and not other things? What are you making them come to campus for? And then a two is that you're using Zoom instead of telephone calls. And the reason why we wanted that to be a more personalized experience that you can get with the Zoom meetings versus trying to get them with the telephone. So that's kind of the ideas behind the scorecard. So we had to set that goal that's what we wanted to do, and it's much easier if you can have your upper level administration on board with you. We then set up awareness meetings. So I actually did presentations about the importance of student support services for our online students. I showed how many students were taking classes online. And actually, there is some really good research out there that indicates that if you provide online services, that not only do your online students use it, but your campus students will also use it. So you're actually increasing engagement with the student for your traditional as well as for your online, and making sure they have the services they need to be successful. Because again, remember, they are maybe working or having other things that are taking them away from campus. So being able to do it at odd hours and also online is helpful. So once we met with the executive leadership and had them on board, we began meeting with mid-level management. And actually we brought mid-level management in, and we actually had them brainstorm, what does this look like? What are your goals? What do you think you should be doing? Instead of us telling them what to do, and we started getting these really wonderful ideas starting to circulate about how can we do this. Then we implemented the self-study to see exactly where we were. And then we implemented those strategies to see how they were working within each of the offices. And then at that brainstorming meeting, the mid-level people said they wanted to take ownership of all students instead of having a separate office set up. So then that made them responsible. The nice thing I have at my institution is, and I think this is also important to think about, is that we had the money to do this, that each office took responsibility and used their own personnel in order to accomplish the goal of providing student support services. So that it wasn't a separate pot of money that we had to set aside. You know, again, we're cash strapped just like any other institution. And I came in and I helped if there was a need for additional laptops that had webcams, or if they needed headsets and those kind of things. And some of our student support offices had not had a computer upgrade. So it was really important that I was able to bring those resources to bear in those offices. And this is just a kind of an idea of the complexity. We just wanted you to understand, you know, how many different places that how many different offices are there to help students. And I thought it was important that all these offices were there not only to help our traditional students, but they're there for our on-campus students. So I think as part of our understanding, and I thought this was quite eye-opening, because for me, I was the director of professional development and course development, and it didn't occur to me that student services would need some of the exact same support that the faculty did. That was very eye-opening for me. And they wanted to have professional development on how to conduct services online. They wanted to understand, and they needed computer upgrades just like the faculty did. And they needed instructional design support, because often you're teaching or training students how to use processes or thinking about how they're approaching their studies. in those cases, you need short instructional videos. So even though they didn't need like an entire course developed, they did still need instructional design support on how to teach in very quick mini movies or tutorials what the students needed to do. So the next slide, you can see what a difference it made for us to have this initiative, and how we were able to really come through for our students and really make a huge impact on their lives. Our graduate support services went 100% online. Our research team, and they're still working on this today, but they did amazing tutorials on how to write an IRB and when should you fill out an IRB, all of that. And the nice thing is it's not just available for our students now, but it's also there for our faculty. So it was a great transition, and I really loved the way everyone was able to buy into this. I would say we trained a lot of, when I had training for student support services, we had 120 staff people come to our training. It was amazing. They really were very interested in providing the support for our online. So we had a lot of buy-in by the time we were to the point where we were training and encouraging our staff people to provide services online. When we moved online, as you heard from Josh, at first it might have been 1 or 2 people within the office, but because one of the 2 people were there, we had more people coming on board with us, and we had people there to help those other ones transition during the COVID period. So let's look at the next slide. So I would say that at our institution, because we used the organizational scorecard to help us with improving our online support services, we had a head start when COVID hit our institution. We had already had a task force that looked at removing barriers and creating processes specifically for our online students. So it was just a matter of all students using those processes. We had already transferred many of our services to online. However, we were still weak in 2 areas, and one of those was mental health support, and you'll find that is typical across most universities, and telehealth. And because of COVID, we now have a state service for counseling that is available to our students in Florida. Then they also have they'll help an out-of-state student locate services within their state. We also have a self-help online helpline, and we also have virtual office appointments, which we did not have before. And then our institution has adopted a telehealth services methodology for helping our students meet their health needs during this time. So I think again, we had a head start, but we still were able to remove quite a few barriers. So what kind of challenges do you think a smaller institution would have versus a large institution in making sure you're providing cohesive, unified services?
Okay, as you're sending your responses to Meg at Q&A 1, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background, quick background about my institution. We are one of the 2+2s in Florida. We have been kind of affectionately call ourselves the biggest of the smalls. So, roughly 6,000 to 7,000 FTE, depending on the term. And when I'm speaking with a national audience, I always like to preface it by the College of Central Florida isn't to be confused with the University of Central Florida, as that's pretty common. We are a much smaller institution, but only about an hour and a half north of UCF. So this process for us was kind of embedded in another process that we had going on. Had a Title III grant and a QEP around the first year experience quality enhancement plan with the Southern Association cycle that we were going through. And we were already examining many of our services as we looked at how we would retain and help those first year students be successful. So it gave us a really good opportunity for me to be embedded in those processes with all of the different departments that I might not have been embedded with before. And then, we could move forward from there. And when we get to our results in a couple of minutes, you'll see kind of why I say don't be afraid of a low score in some areas. We have never had a problem when it came time to proving that we were providing equivalent services, but part of the reason to use an instrument like this is you don't want to say, well, good enough is good enough. You always want to be having that continuous improvement. So this is kind of our organizational chart. Again, the takeaway, just like with Dr. Brown, the services are spread out in a variety of offices, especially at a smaller institution like mine. Those offices are maybe pretty used to doing things the way they've done things. And those of us in the distance learning side of the house might not have a regular presence in those offices. So we really, again, kind of through this Title III and QEP process, our goal, our two goals that we were striving for were those success and retention goals. And we put a number of things in place to help us improve our student services towards those ends. And here's our graph of our numbers. So you can see when we first did this, we were pretty weak in some areas. Being a 2+2 and most of our online students residing within our Tri-County service area, many of these offices were operating under the assumption that students could come in to receive services. And through these processes, we were able to bring the awareness to them that not only could many of the students truly not come in, they were taking online classes because there were other things in their lives that kept them from coming to class. So therefore, they would also have trouble receiving the services. But as Dr. Brown alluded to, services for online students are services for all students. And
Josh,
we were able to improve a number of the areas. Yes, Meg.
Just wanted to jump in that there were a couple of questions in the chat. When you asked the questions originally about, what were the concerns of the small college, like 20 people said staffing. So the major concern was, the limited staffing in offices and, how, other questions were how receptive were the staff in the various offices for the need to improve these services. And another set of questions about how do you think you'll be able to maintain this, post-COVID?
Okay, so staffing, that's an issue with just about any topic that you bring up at a small institution. Staffing's an issue. We have been fortunate in my office that we've had some great support from senior administration so that we would have staffing that we needed. I'm hopeful that through through the COVID, hopefully it's a very short era, but through the COVID era, the staff that are in place in those areas will now have the skills that they need to support the distance learners. We have gone to their meetings, we've done trainings for them, we've done all of those types of things because it is rare that we would be able to hire additional staff and embed them in those areas just to focus on our distance learners. So it is almost always going to have to be the existing staff. And potentially as there's natural turnover, then put more emphasis on the online learners and those skills and the hiring process and those types of things. The question about uh, maintaining these services, we are going to get to that a little bit more, but that's very much an open question. I have a whole slide of new things that we are doing to manage these things in this time, and our orange bars there on this slide that represent where we are now, many of those would be bumped up now towards the exemplary service level because of what we're doing. But a lot of what we were doing was funded through CARES Act money or institutional reserves, things like that. Those are one-time funding sources, and we will have to get creative on how we're going to maintain the services. In Florida, we're a little bit fortunate that they're statutorily we're allowed to charge an e-learning fee, and there are some constraints on where that money goes, as there is with any fee. So that might be a source for some institutions, and it'll be an institution to institution decision on which of these costs might be able to be attributed and sourced through those fees. So here's the slide that I was mentioning. Not going to obviously discuss each one of these, but these are all areas where we've been able to take our zeros and ones on the scorecard and bump them up a little bit closer to twos. I think these are examples of, even as a small institution, you probably have a lot of talent that maybe just didn't have the focus at the time to build out these services. We have never really had a virtual campus tour before. We developed one very quickly for these students, and they've already won a gold medal in a competition from their marketing national professional organization that they're a part of for that. We have done some things where we used to have librarians go out to courses and visit with the students one-on-one, and they're now embedded virtually, advising. The virtual tool that we went with is what we're using now, Zoom. So that gives us the ability to replicate our front desk and student services as a Zoom room and have breakout rooms where the professionals who the students would need to meet with in the different areas are, and then a front office person can virtually direct the students in those areas. Online proctoring, we've mentioned a lot about students that might not have technology available or internet access. So we used to partner with a certain online proctoring service at the student's expense, and it was quite expensive. So it was one thing to say, yes, we have online proctoring for the students, but then when you drill down to there has to be a lot of lead time for the student to say, I need online proctoring, and then a staff member input that into the system. Then the students make their appointment, 48 to 72 hours in advance and what have you. It's like, yes, we have the service, but it isn't great. So we've switched providers. The college is able to provide that at no expense to the students. At least for the time being. We've have laptops and webcams that we can check out to the students now that we've not had before. We have Wi-Fi in the green spaces and parking lot areas for them to take advantage of that service, as well as get on their online courses and complete their coursework. Then we found out that the proctoring company has some constraints on how they'll proctor students. So we had to have a discussion with them about, yes, it's okay to proctor a student who's sitting in the front seat of their car, or a student who is locked in the bedroom sitting on the bed because they're living multiple families in the same housing unit, and their bed is the only place that they're able to have any privacy to take an exam. So it just gets deeper and deeper the more you go down, kind of go down the student services rabbit hole. And I've got a few student activities board events listed there, and something from our lab school. So one of our colleagues at UCF, Dr. Jubin, who works with measurement there a lot, he's told all of us in our Florida group that the quantitative isn't the only thing that matters. The qualitative is also very important, because it helps you get those stories and drive future improvement and be good examples in your own institution. So we have a lab school that serves both as a learning experience for our early childhood education students, and serves as a low-cost place for our students to be able to have childcare for their kids. So one of the last thing I was expecting as we were moving online in COVID, is to be asked to put just under 100 kindergarteners in our learning management system, so that those experiences could be continued and those students could have their K-5 graduation when their parents were expecting them to. And then some of our student activities board events. I mentioned there we had a henna tattoo at home experience as an engagement experience. So we're very lucky as a small institution to have a world-class accredited art museum as part of our institution. And it's across town from our main campus, but a lot of our students take advantage of it. So we partnered with them. We were able to get supplies out to students, and we had around 50 students participate in a Zoom meeting for a henna tattoo at home experience. So a lot of you have mentioned engagement with students and measuring that. And that's one of those things, we can measure the number of students that participated, but these stories are also a very good way to measure. And now this event will be kind of an internal good example of the types of things that we want to work on going forward. And then the last thing, probably all of us have looked at some sort of virtual graduation experience for our students, but that's something brand new for us, that we're, besides just, we've done a live video stream before, but a true virtual graduation experience is new to us. You're still muted, Dr. Brown.
I just want to make sure that we also talk about the effects of this upon student success and graduation. And at our institution, we were able to enroll the same number of students that we had before COVID, during COVID. And our success rates have been very similar. We haven't seen a drop off. So those are really good stories to tell if you have all of these services in place. That's helpful for that student engagement piece. Also, the scorecard, we found it to be a very useful tool to conduct a self-study to see what you're offering and what you're not, and finding those gaps and holes in what you're doing for engaging. And remember, one of the, and you haven't had a chance to look at the scorecard, but one of them is actually offering all your clubs that you have on campus available online. So it's not always, it's thinking about every part of what you're doing. We found that students services availability improved, and that both efforts required cross-department involvement, and both efforts required us to work across different organizational levels. Let's get the next slide because we're getting close to the end here, and let's just go to some observations that we've seen as an industry regarding student support services as a result of COVID. And one of those is that we are seeing many institutions dropping their entrance and placement testing. And I've heard some great input about that it's actually opening the door and removing barriers for minority students and students with low socioeconomic status that they should never have had to try to overcome and getting into an institution. Many institutions are reviewing these legacy processes that they might have had in place, and they're starting to remove those dated ones so they can create a streamlined experience, and having those available online versus having a piece of paper being carried in between a student to a faculty member, from the faculty member back to another office. There's also, we're starting to see increased access to tiered level services. So thinking about a centralized system for addressing student needs, where students are able to call if they have a quick question, it's very easily answered, and then having specialists on board that can answer more in-depth or complex questions. And advising, they're doing more short advising instead of trying to sit down with a student for 30 minutes. And what we're finding is that the quality of interaction with students, if you focus on one or two things within a meeting, and then following up with emails, text messages, students are more likely to accept an appointment, and the students were more likely to actually meet with the advisor too. And those students who did not meet with the advisor, we were starting to see that the advisor could still do some follow-up work with that student through email or chat. We're also starting to see that as institutions are looking at their students, they're starting to view them in a more holistic perspective, as now that they have windows into students' lives. And that also, whatever help we're giving a student is also helping the family, and also making sure we're personalizing those interactions with students. So I'd like to kind of leave some time here for some question and answers. So maybe Josh, if we could just go ahead and advance to the question and answer. So this is a great time to post some questions that you might have had and through our presentation. And you have three experts here that can hopefully answer some of those questions for you.
So we have a couple of questions about general student services and a couple of questions about the actual instrument itself. So just a question on the instrument, who's involved with the rating? If you would just talk a little bit about that.
The rating is done by the institution itself, unless you want to pay for it. And then if you're paying for it, then Josh and I actually will walk you through, we will actually do a rating. And even in our process, we ask the institution to rate, and then we rate. So that way we can help you uncover some holes. It was kind of interesting. One of the institutions we worked with, they kept saying, we have this, and we were like, we can't find it. So having that outside set of eyes as consultants is very, very helpful in finding some of those holes that you may not have perceived that you actually had. So we actually, at our institution, I actually walked in and sat down with each of the departments, and we co-rated that section. So that way I could make sure that they were thinking about a distance learning student, not just all their students. I believe Josh had a different approach.
Yeah, we just briefly, we were a little bit more compressed in our time frame to get this done. So I divided the scorecard up and sent it out to the offices where the services resided, and then kind of took their ratings, and there were a couple of them I had to, adjust down where maybe they had rated themselves a little higher than I knew was realistic for us. And across the state, we've seen just a variety of different internal ways that institutions evaluated themselves. Just about anything that you could think of was used.
Yeah, and the reason we did that is because we really didn't want our Board of Governors coming in at the university system level and saying, oh, this was, you shouldn't have done this way or that way. We really wanted it to be an internal review. And even when we shared results with the Board of Governors, we did not share institutional results. We just shared across the system results.
And I would say in SUNY, we set up, the SUNY Central Office set up a formal benchmarking approach for the survey with peers from like-minded institutions. So, a visiting team of 3 individuals would go out to each of the campuses that was interested, but those visiting people would not give their assessment. What they did was they helped you to understand where your institution was and how to get to a good, to a rating for each of those. So help to lead a benchmarking exercise. And the same caveats that Vicki just talked about related to, we don't share the results unless the institution chooses to share the results. There are another couple of questions that are more about some of the topics brought up in student services today. And one is some worry about getting, the questioner was asking, that student services staff who work with clubs or in the dining hall or work as RAs or work as, other people across the campus are often the first window to a student in trouble. And how do we in the online environment support getting that type of engagement so that the student support staff are, windows and connected to the learner, so we get kind of a heads up that there might be somebody who's in trouble. We all know that faculty sometimes get that window, but how do you make that happen with support staff?
So we did make sure at our institution that we worked across. So we continued to have collaborative meetings where we met and shared with each other what we were doing for distance learning support services people. And we also put in place a student support advocate. And we had 2 of them. We actually had one that sat in the distance learning office, so that 10 times that's the first place that people think to reach out to. And that person was highly knowledgeable about everything that was going on in student support services across the campus. And we also had another one sitting in tutoring support services, because sometimes they're doing poorly. And remember, faculty are referring to that student support service person, these people who need assistance. And also we're trying to use our data analytics coming from our learning management system to know who is in trouble. So we had those people who were very knowledgeable and could interface with the other units. And then we also made sure our advisors were very aware of all these different opportunities that are available to help students. So we could say, well, have you talked to your advisor? And then their advisor could act as a conduit to the other institutions. And then we had the one-stop. I didn't get a chance to talk about this very much, but we actually have a one-stop webpage that is for distance learning only. So you can go to that page. It's become like one of the best pages, and it's used by students all across the university, actually. So they could go there and get quick answers or know who to call or who to look for from our one-stop shop page. So I think those things were very helpful in building, getting from the windows. We made sure everyone knew that that one-stop was there, and then also working collaborative across the university.
I would just add also that, when working with, if you think about traditional clubs and services, or you think about your learning support service center, I think institutions that have pivoted well have made sure that there's a comprehensive calendar of programming that is similar to what happened on campus is happening online. And, for many campuses, that should mean, having 30 to 50 workshops a week on something. It should be student life, it should be academic support, it should be careers. And when those staff are engaging in those webinars or workshops, I think they can get to know the students in many ways that can be as comprehensive as meeting with the students in a face-to-face webinar or seminar. So I think people, the very creative student services staff are starting to step up. And the other thing I've heard, back to Josh's question that he got about staffing, people are worried about their jobs in COVID. They're worried that campuses are going to downsize. And I think, they recognize that, we're going to have to change to deliver services. And part of, making that added value is that, we need to be pretty proactive about what we do. We only have about one more minute. There were a couple of questions that were very technical questions, like how do you find out more about proctoring? Can we find out, a little bit more about things like extended student service hours and those kind of things? I would say the best source for those types of resources are to look at the professional associations for online learning, to look at UPSEA, to look at the Online Learning Consortium, to looking at WCET out west, distance education associations. And they often, particularly with things like proctoring, will have a rating system and a sharing of people who have used the various opportunities that are available in any of those.
I just posted, because I had a request for that one-stop student services website, and it's available in the chat. I also put in the link to the scorecard again. Yeah. I also want to share with you, it's looking up my name sometimes can be really helpful. I have an article actually about proctoring, the different types of proctoring and decision processes, and it's with the Online Journal for Distance Learning Administrators. So it's free, so you just have to look for it, and it's about proctoring and academic integrity.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank my co-hosts, and I'd like to thank Middle States for putting together this excellent showcase here. We're all pleased to receive questions about anything here. As I mentioned earlier, Middle States, everybody who registered, they'll get a link that you can refer to. We just got a very good comment. I agree 100% with it, that Carlos reminds us to look at alternative assessment rather than proctoring. I entirely agree with you, Carlos. So I will say that also out loud. Many thanks to our active participation. We were a little worried about the number of people and whether or not we could get people to engage. And you guys really jumped up and really fit the bill, and we were very, very pleased. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. And we've enjoyed sharing our experiences with you.
Yes.